Before we begin, just a quick note. This video doesn't use horror footage or jump scares. Instead, I've kept it simple. Just real chilling stories and soft rain sounds in the background. Because sometimes, all it takes is a voice and your own imagination to feel fear. So if you're lying in bed, trying to sleep, just close your eyes, listen, and let the stories unfold. Most people today don't know what the Wendigo is. Some say it's a myth, told by Algonquian-speaking Native American tribes. Just another folktale to scare children away from wandering too deep into the woods. But those who've lived long enough near the pine forests of northern Minnesota know better. They whisper its name with dread, not because they believe in fairy tales, but because too many have vanished. Too many have gone mad, and some have come back wrong. The Wendigo is a creature of winter and starvation. It's said to be born from desperate acts when a person consumes human flesh out of hunger. The transformation isn't instant. It happens slowly, with the soul rotting first, followed by the body stretching and contorting into something unrecognizable. Emaciated, tall as a tree, eyes glowing faintly in the cold dark, and a heart that no longer beats. The Wendigo is cursed with eternal hunger. No matter how much it eats, it is never full. This story isn't about legends though. It's about something that happened to a man named Thomas Keller and his 12-year-old son, Luke. In the fall of 2016, Thomas, a single father and a former forest ranger, decided to take his son on a camping trip. Not just for fun, he wanted to show Luke the same woods he grew up in, to toughen him up, and to create the kind of bond he'd missed with his own father. They drove 6 hours from Duluth into the dense expanse of the Iron Range, near a forgotten part of the Superior National Forest where Thomas once worked. It was off-season, cold enough for frost, but not quite snow. The forest was dying, the trees bare, and everything felt like it was holding its breath. They parked the truck on a service trail and hiked 5 miles in with their gear. No cell reception, no other campers, just endless trees, the sound of wind through branches, and the crunch of dried leaves underfoot. By dusk, they set up camp near a clearing. Thomas taught Luke how to start a fire, pitch the tent, and boil water from a stream. Everything was going as planned. They roasted hot dogs, shared stories, and laughed under the dull glow of the lantern. But just before they turned in for the night, Luke pointed toward the trees. "Dad, someone's watching us." Thomas stood up quickly. He saw nothing, just trees and darkness. "It's probably a deer, or your imagination. We're the only ones out here." But Luke wouldn't let it go. He kept looking over his shoulder, nervously glancing at the shadows that grew longer and darker as the night deepened. And then came the smell, rank, like rotting meat mixed with wet soil. It drifted through the campsite and made Thomas gag. Animals sometimes died nearby. He knew the forest well, but this smell wasn't just death. It was old, heavy, and wrong. They zipped themselves inside the tent for the night, but neither of them slept. Around 2 a.m., they heard it, a dragging sound, something large, moving slowly just outside the tent. Then, a soft sniffing, right up against the nylon. Luke was trembling beside his father. Thomas reached for the hunting knife he always kept nearby. He held his breath, listening. The sniffing continued, then stopped. There was silence for nearly a full minute. Then, something spoke. "Luke," a whisper, dry, hollow, almost unsure of itself. Thomas bolted upright, knife ready. He burst out of the tent, flashlight in hand, blade in the other. Nothing, only trees, cold wind, silence. But that smell was stronger now. He circled the tent, found no tracks, no animal prints, no boot marks, nothing. Just leaves and dirt. But Luke didn't imagine that voice. Thomas didn't say anything. He didn't want to scare his son. But he knew something was out there, and it wasn't human. They should have left the next morning. But they didn't, and they would regret that for the rest of their lives. By the next morning, the woods had changed. What was once an eerie silence now felt watchful, like the trees themselves had taken notice of them. Every rustling leaf, every distant snap of a twig sent a tremor through Ethan's chest. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Elijah, who had always loved the outdoors, looked pale. His eyes darted constantly. Even the birds seemed absent, as though nature had taken cover. Around 7:30 a.m., they set off deeper into the woods, crossing a narrow stream and following the faint trail left behind by the older hunter from the night before. Ethan wanted to talk, maybe tell his son everything would be okay, but a lump sat in his throat. Every word he could think of felt like a lie. About a mile in, they came across a shredded backpack near a half-rotted tree. Blood smeared across the bark. Elijah bent down to examine it, but Ethan stopped him. "Don't touch it," he said firmly. The boy nodded, his face expressionless. Next to the pack lay a rusted canteen, a hunting knife bent in the middle, and what looked like claw marks across the frozen soil. Not the kind of claw marks you'd associate with a bear or a wolf. These were too deep, too deliberate, as though something with fingers, long, bony ones, had dragged them along. Ethan took out his phone again. Still no signal. They continued on. By midday, the forest had gone quiet again. Not peaceful, quiet in a way that screamed of danger. Elijah clutched his small flashlight even though the sun was still out. That's when they saw it. A massive pile of animal bones arranged in a crude circle, with symbols carved into several of the skulls. Not tribal, not random. These were old, etched deeply and repeatedly, as if scratched with desperation. Ethan knelt and touched one, still warm. "Elijah," he said, "we're not alone here." The boy looked at him, wide-eyed, and nodded silently. They backtracked fast, but the woods didn't look the same anymore. Trees twisted slightly inward. Shadows fell where no sunlight should have touched. At one point, Elijah stopped, pointing at the ground. "Dad, my footprints are gone." Ethan looked behind them. The trail had vanished. There was no sign they had ever walked this way. They made camp before sunset, setting up near a large stone formation to use as cover. Ethan kept the fire small, almost out of fear it would attract attention. Elijah didn't ask for dinner. He just stared at the flames, silent, while Ethan kept his rifle close and scanned the tree line. Around 10 p.m., the whispering began, faint at first, like wind caught in pine needles, but then clearer, rhythmic, mocking. "Elijah!" The boy jerked his head. "Did you hear that?" Ethan nodded, lifting the rifle. He stood up slowly, circling the fire. Snap. A branch broke just beyond the tree line. Another whisper. "Ethan." That voice, it wasn't human. It was as if someone was trying to imitate human speech, but had never actually spoken before. Distorted, wet, slurred. Ethan motioned Elijah toward him. "Get behind me." But the whispering grew bolder, closer. Then a sound echoed that made Ethan's skin go cold. A sobbing voice. Elijah's voice. "Dad, help, please. I'm cold." But Elijah was right beside him. "What the hell?" Ethan whispered. The Wendigo wasn't just hunting them. It was toying with them. At midnight, they took shelter in a hollow under the rock formation. Ethan stayed awake, gun loaded, watching the fire die out slowly. Elijah slept fitfully beside him, murmuring in his dreams. Then, just past 2 a.m., something moved. At first it was subtle, leaves rustling, twigs snapping. Then the breathing began. Not theirs, something else. Deep, raspy. Inhaling long and slow, exhaling with a hiss. It was coming from above. Ethan looked up and saw it, a silhouette clinging to the underside of the rock shelf. He froze. Its limbs were long, too long, like someone had stretched a human body past its limits. Antlers crowned its head, but they weren't like a deer's. They were twisted, fractured, blackened. Its mouth was wide open, lined with jagged, rotting teeth. Its eyes... God, its eyes were hollow. No light, no color, just void. Ethan slowly reached for his rifle, but the creature crawled backward, silently vanishing into the dark like a spider. By dawn, neither of them had slept. They packed up and walked. No direction, just forward, anywhere away from that place. Hours passed. The forest never ended. And that's when Elijah collapsed. His foot had twisted badly in a dip beneath the snow. He screamed in pain. Ethan carried him for a while until his own strength began to fail. Then he heard it again. That whisper. Only now. It was inside his head. You're slowing down, Ethan. The boy is weak. Leave him. Save yourself. He'll only die slower with you. Ethan gritted his teeth. Shut up. Elijah looked up. What? Nothing. Just keep quiet. But the voice didn't stop. It grew louder, more persuasive, showing him flashes, images of his own death, of Elijah being torn apart, of teeth and antlers and blood. You're only delaying it. That night, they reached a dilapidated ranger's cabin deep in the woods. It was rotted, the door hanging loose, but it was sheltered. Ethan broke open the remains of a cabinet, found a flare gun with a single round, and a nearly rusted-out lantern. They locked themselves inside and started a fire. It was the first warmth they'd felt in days. But Elijah looked distant now, not scared, detached. He whispered, "Dad, it talks to me too." Ethan stared at him. "What?" "It told me it used to be a man. Said he came here a long time ago and got lost. Said he was hungry. Said he made a choice." Ethan's blood ran cold. It promised me I wouldn't feel pain if I just let it in. "No," Ethan said. "Don't listen. That thing lies." But Elijah's eyes were glassy now. What if it's better than this? What if dying in pieces isn't worth it? Ethan grabbed his shoulders. "Don't you dare say that. We fight, you hear me, until our last breath." But outside, something was scratching at the cabin. Then, tapping on the windows. Tap, tap, tap. When they looked, they saw it. The Wendigo, standing completely still, watching them, waiting. The forest was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that calmed you, but the kind that screamed something was wrong. No birdsong, no rustling. Just the crunch of dead pine needles under Daniel's boots as he followed behind his son. "Stay close to me," Daniel whispered, holding a flashlight in one hand and his rifle in the other. The beam danced across twisted trees and crooked branches. Every few feet they found signs, shreds of clothing caught in the bark, a claw mark too high for any bear, a pile of bones picked clean and broken open for marrow. "What the hell did this, Dad?" asked Jacob, voice trembling. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't want to say it out loud. He hadn't believed it either, not until now. They'd walked for nearly 2 hours deeper into the woods. The fog had thickened, and the air grew colder, almost unnaturally so. Jacob's breath came in visible clouds. Their fingers had gone numb despite the gloves. "Look," Jacob suddenly pointed to a trail of footprints, bare, humanoid, but too long. The toes clawed. They weren't fresh, but they hadn't been there in the morning. Whatever made them was moving around, following, watching. Daniel crouched to inspect the prints. It's stalking us. That's when the scream came again, but it wasn't human. It sounded like a woman at first, high-pitched and desperate, but then it twisted mid-scream, turning guttural, then inhuman. Something was mimicking human suffering, something that wanted them to come looking. Jacob turned white. "Don't move," Daniel whispered. "It's trying to lure us." A tree ahead bent under weight. They both froze. Then a long, spindly hand gripped the trunk, covered in leathery, pale skin stretched over bone. A second hand followed. It crawled down unnaturally, like a spider, and revealed itself fully in the dim light, tall, emaciated, ribcage exposed, jaw slack, mouth filled with jagged teeth, horns like twisted antlers, and worst of all, its eyes, glowing sunken pits of amber rage. Jacob gasped. The creature's head snapped in his direction. Daniel fired. The bullet hit its shoulder, but it didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, studying them. Then it ran, number charged, not like a man, not like a beast. It skittered on all fours, limbs too long, too fast, its joints bending wrong. They ran. They crashed through the forest, branches whipping their faces, roots trying to trip them. Daniel grabbed Jacob's arm and yanked him along. "There," he shouted, spotting an old ranger shack up ahead, half buried in the snow and moss. It looked abandoned, but it was shelter. They burst inside, slamming the door, locking it with a rusty bar, panting, heart pounding. Jacob collapsed in the corner. "Dad, what the fuck was that?" Daniel didn't answer. He'd seen it in a book once, in a tribe's journal passed down generations. He remembered now. Wendigo. He started stacking furniture against the windows. "Help me. We need to hold out till daylight." "But will it leave?" "Number it won't stop until one of us is dead." An hour passed. Jacob was nodding off, exhaustion hitting him. Daniel kept the gun pointed at the door. Every few minutes, there'd be a knock, a soft scratch, then silence. Then came the voice, "Jacob, please open the door." His mother's voice. Jacob sat up, stunned. "Mom." Daniel shook his head violently. "Don't listen. She's gone. You know that." The voice again, this time sobbing. "It's cold out here, baby. Let me in." Jacob's eyes welled. How does it know her voice? Daniel didn't answer. The Wendigo wasn't just a hunter. It was cruel. It remembered. Then the roof buckled. Wood cracked. Daniel raised the gun, firing through the ceiling. But the thing was already inside, dropped in from above. It landed in the middle of the shack, bones crunching under its weight. Its head turned impossibly slow. Then it lunged. Daniel shoved Jacob out of the way. The rifle fired once, twice, missed. The Wendigo was on him, jaws clamping down on Daniel's shoulder, ripping into flesh. He screamed. Jacob grabbed the axe by the wall and charged, slamming it into the monster's spine. It shrieked, not in pain, in anger. It backhanded Jacob across the room, his head hitting the wall with a sick thud. Daniel, still bleeding, reached for the flare gun on his belt. One shot left. He aimed it at the beast's face, fired. The flare burst into blinding red light, setting part of its antlered head ablaze. The Wendigo screamed and thrashed. Smoke filled the room. It clawed its way through the broken window, vanishing into the trees. Silence. Jacob groaned, barely conscious. His father crawled over, pulling him into his lap. I think it's gone," Jacob whispered. Daniel didn't answer. He looked down. The bite mark was already turning black, veins bulging, skin rotting. Jacob noticed. Number no. No, Dad, tell me it's not. Daniel smiled sadly. You have to run, son, while I still have time. Jacob was crying now, shaking his head. But Daniel's voice had already started to change, deeper, echoing. The curse had begun. The third morning was colder than before. Snow clung to the branches like veins of ice. The tent's thin walls barely kept the chill out, and when James opened his eyes, his breath hung in the air, thick and slow like smoke. Across from him, Daniel was already up, tying his boots. His eyes looked darker, more sunken. Neither of them had really slept. Daniel hadn't spoken much since the second night. Whatever he had seen in those trees had taken something from him. His jokes had stopped. His voice was quieter now, rough and detached, like someone watching himself from the outside. James stepped out, stretching his arms, trying to shake off the nausea of restless sleep. The silence in the woods had deepened. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals. It was like the forest was holding its breath. Daniel pointed to something in the snow. Bare footprints, long spindly toes, human, but not. James followed the trail with his eyes. It circled the tent, twice. It was watching us, Daniel muttered, his voice flat. They both knew. They didn't need to say it. Something was hunting them. Around noon, they moved deeper into the woods, hoping to get back to the logging trail James remembered from his youth. They didn't want to turn back the same way, not after the smell they caught lingering near their old campsite, the way their trail had been dug through, like a dog tearing through earth. They found an old collapsed cabin. The roof had caved in, and one of the walls leaned against a tree like it was trying to escape. Inside bones, deer, maybe, and a stench like mold and wet fur. Daniel stood outside staring into the tree line. His eyes were twitching slightly. You hear it, he whispered. James paused. At first, nothing. Then from deep within the woods, the crunch of branches, slow, deliberate. He reached for the axe strapped to his pack. Daniel didn't move. He was locked in place. Don't look at it, he said suddenly. If you see it, it knows. James's blood turned to ice. That night, they didn't bother with the tent. They holed up in the remains of the cabin, stacking broken boards and branches across the opening. James lit a fire with trembling hands. He didn't want to look outside. He didn't want to listen either, but the noises always came. It started with wind, whistling through the trees unnaturally. Then the whispering. Daniel. James froze. The voice was low, breathy. It came from the trees. Daniel, come out. Daniel stared at the fire, not blinking, his face pale and still. It's not her, he whispered, more to himself than James. You think it's her? Daniel looked up. She used to call me like that, from the porch, when I was a kid. James leaned in. Daniel, look at me. That's not your mother. That thing is using you. A long silence. Then scraping, clawing. Not on the walls, on the roof. James grabbed the axe. Daniel grabbed nothing. The roof broke, not fully, just enough for something to slither through. A long, emaciated limb reached in, fingers tipped with curved yellow claws. Its skin was grey, tight against bone. The fire crackled louder, sparks flew. James swung. The axe connected, and the scream that followed was inhuman, high-pitched, shrill, like metal screaming against metal. Daniel was crying, not out of fear, but longing. It knows what I want, he said. It's not real, James shouted. It says it can bring her back. And just like that, Daniel was gone. He bolted into the woods, without the axe, without a flashlight. Gone. James stayed by the fire, clutching the axe until sunrise. The forest didn't sleep. He heard snapping branches, laughing. Sometimes it sounded like Daniel, sometimes like someone else entirely. When daylight broke, he ran. He didn't look for Daniel. He couldn't. Instead, he made for the mountain ridge. A few miles out, the trees grew sparse. Maybe there'd be signal, maybe not. Maybe it didn't matter. By late afternoon, snow began to fall again. Light at first, then thick, blinding. James slipped once, smashing his knee on a rock. He tied it tight with his shirt, limping forward. As he reached a clearing, he saw it. Daniel, standing still, staring into the trees. James called his name. No response. He got closer. Daniel turned. His face was wrong, too pale, eyes all black, mouth twitching upward, as if he didn't know how to smile. His voice came out slowly. Wrong. You left me, James. James stumbled back, raised the axe. Stay back. Daniel, or the thing wearing Daniel's skin, tilted its head. You wanted to leave me, just like they did. Suddenly, he dropped to all fours, bones cracking, stretching. The transformation began. The forest had transformed into a labyrinth of darkness. The moonlight barely touched the mossy floor now, as if the sky itself had turned away in dread. The only sound that remained was the wind scraping through the trees like whispered warnings, and the crunch of boots on dead leaves as Caleb dragged his numb legs forward, holding tightly to Nathan's trembling hand. Nathan hadn't said a word since the night before. Not since he saw what came out of that cave. His once curious bright eyes were now glassy, distant, as if part of him was still standing there staring into the abyss where the Wendigo shriek had split the air. Caleb tried to protect him from it, turning him away, covering his ears. But something about that sound, it had gotten inside them. A cry that wasn't just noise, but hunger, grief, rage, so raw and ancient that it stripped away the walls of the mind. Caleb had seen things in his sleep since then. Faces, twisted bodies, his wife screaming his name from inside a tree, his own body rotting while he looked on. He didn't know what was real anymore. They hadn't found a way out. Every path curved in on itself. Every trail they marked vanished by the next morning. Their food was gone. Water ran low. Caleb's beard had grown wild, and his skin itched with bites and filth. He looked like one of those missing posters from years past. That morning, Nathan had woken up with deep scratches down his chest, clothes torn, no memory of how it happened. Did something grab you? Caleb had asked, voice quaking. Nathan only shook his head, then muttered, It's under us. Always under us. That same day, they found another structure. A fire pit, still warm, broken tools, a ripped pack and a jacket too large for Nathan. Hope had sparked for a moment. Other hikers, survivors. Then Caleb spotted the stains, dark, soaked into the dirt. Something had eaten there, not cooked, eaten raw. He didn't let Nathan see. They kept walking. Caleb's leg was swollen now from the branch wound. It burned when he moved, and black veins had started creeping up from the gash. He wrapped it tighter and pushed forward. He had to get Nathan out. He had to. That was the only thing keeping him upright. But Nathan was slipping further away each day. That night, as they lay under a thin, wet tarp, Caleb finally asked, "Do you remember what you saw that first night?" Nathan stayed silent for a while. The wind groaned through the pines. "It was wearing someone's skin," he whispered at last. Caleb's breath caught. "What?" "It looked like a man at first, but it wasn't. It was too tall. Bones sticking out. Skin all stretched and torn, like it didn't fit. Its mouth didn't close right. And its eyes... Nathan's voice cracked. It knew I was there, but it didn't care. It just kept eating. Caleb stared into the darkness, heart pounding. Nathan rolled onto his side. It was chewing on a leg. I saw the shoe. It was Mom's. A deep silence followed. Caleb's chest tightened until he couldn't breathe. He wanted to cry, to scream, but no sound came. The next morning, Caleb woke up cold. Nathan was gone. No footprints, no struggle. Just a carved symbol in the dirt where he had slept. A spiral shape, old and deep. Around it were scattered bones. Rabbit, squirrel, numbered tiny human phalanges. Caleb lost control then. Screaming Nathan's name into the woods, running without direction, tearing through branches until blood ran down his arms. His vision swam. The trees twisted around him like fingers closing in. He fell once, then twice, and then it came. A distant shriek, not loud, but sharp enough to pierce his skull. It was closer now. Branches cracked behind him. Something moved like smoke, fast, long-limbed. He turned and saw only shadows, but the stench hit him. Rotting meat, wet fur, soil soaked in blood. He ran, blindly, desperately, his legs screaming with every step. And then he stumbled out onto a wide open space. A road, a real road. Dirt and gravel, but man-made. Faint tire marks. For a second he froze, disbelieving. Then he bolted down the path, lungs burning. Behind him, the trees writhed. A howl rose that seemed to split the ground. Caleb didn't look back, but he never saw the tree root. It snagged his foot. He fell hard, face first into the gravel. The world spun. He tried to rise. And then, it was there, right behind him. Its breath was hot and moist against his neck. Caleb didn't scream. He knew it was over. He whispered his son's name. And the world turned black. As the weeks crawled by like wounded animals, something inside Caleb began to wither. The forest no longer seemed external. It had seeped inside him. The sound of cracking branches beneath boots echoed in his skull, long after he returned to the cabin. The shadows outside no longer needed nightfall. They walked in the daylight too, just subtler. He kept telling himself it was the hunger, the cold, the loneliness. But it wasn't. It was the Wendigo. He'd read everything the old native books in the attic could offer. Wendigo was no mere beast. It was a curse, a spirit born out of starvation and greed. It wasn't just something that hunted. It was something that infected, took root, and once it had you, it never left. You became it. He thought about killing himself. One night, he stood outside the cabin, snow falling like ash, shotgun in hand, barrel in his mouth, finger pressing slowly. And that's when he heard the voice again. Caleb. It was Ethan's voice this time. His son, software fragile, coming from deep within the trees. He staggered back, dropping the gun. No, you're not real. But the voice came again. Dad, please help me. He bolted into the trees, snow up to his knees, heart hammering, voice twisting his soul in directions that no compass could understand. And somehow, impossibly, the forest opened, like it wanted him to come home. The deeper he went, the more real it became. He saw clothes shredded and hanging from trees, teeth marks on bark, bones. Oh God, bones scattered along the frozen earth, tiny ones, some with tufts of hair, some still wearing shoes. Then he saw the red, a thin trail of it winding through the snow like a thread, a child's blood. Ethan's blood. He followed it, and at the end of it, a clearing, still, silent, unnatural, and in the center of it was Ethan, or what used to be Ethan. His son stood with his back turned, shoulders hunched, spine unnaturally arched. His skin was pale and stretched tight over bones. His breath didn't fog. His hands, curled like claws, hung lower than they should. "Ethan!" The boy turned around slowly. His eyes were black, not like pupils, like pits, void, no reflection, no soul. His mouth hung open wider than humanly possible, full of jagged, yellowing teeth. Not Ethan. Never again. The creature moved, snapping forward in a spasm of limbs and clicking joints, and Caleb stumbled back, falling, arms up. But it didn't kill him. It spoke. "You let me in." Its voice was Ethan's. And not, "You heard me. You followed me." That's how it starts. Caleb was crying, uncontrollably. "Please, please no." "You think I'm the monster," it hissed. "You fed me, Caleb, with your grief, with your guilt. Every night you listened, every night you hoped. That's the taste I wanted." It moved closer, claws inches from his face. "And now, you're ready." Something broke inside him then, like a dam cracking open, and he screamed, not in fear, but in surrender. The wind howled in unison, the trees swayed, and somewhere deep beneath the ground, something ancient smiled. The Wendigo took him, and Caleb didn't fight. Back in town, weeks later, a ranger found the cabin. Door open, cold fire, dust, Moldavian. No sign of Caleb, no blood. Just one thing left behind, a journal. Open to a final page. Sometimes the thing you're running from isn't chasing you. It's waiting for you to stop. There were claw marks on the margins, and from deep in the woods, something screamed, not in pain, in hunger. For 2 days, David and Isaac stayed in the ranger station, surviving off whatever canned food and bottled water they could find. The doors were barred, the windows blocked with overturned furniture. Every night, the thing outside scratched. Sometimes it whispered, and sometimes it laughed. Not the booming kind of laugh. It was low, guttural, breathy, like someone trying to remember how to imitate human amusement. David barely slept. Isaac started mumbling in his sleep, and by the 3rd day, his condition worsened. He refused to eat, wouldn't talk much, and kept staring out the boarded window like something out there was calling him. "Don't look at it," David had told him. "Don't listen to it." But Isaac didn't stop. And then, around midnight, David awoke to the sound of the front door unlocking. He scrambled to his feet and ran to stop it. But he was too late. The door creaked open, and Isaac was gone. David ran out barefoot into the cold, dense forest night, screaming his son's name. The mist had returned, heavier than ever, and it clung to the trees like wet cotton. Every few steps he'd hear rustling, a whisper or a growl. He followed a trail of tiny footprints, Isaac's, deeper into the trees. The forest opened up to a small clearing near a dried-up streambed. And there stood Isaac, his back to David, arms at his side, staring at something. A towering, rotting figure crouched just beyond the tree line. Ribs jutting out like jagged bone fingers, skin stretched too tightly across a skull with black, empty sockets, its mouth wet and twitching, unhinged wider than a human's ever should. David whispered, "No, no, please." The Wendigo bent forward, its limbs cracking with every movement. Its breath steamed the air like smoke from a dead furnace. And then it spoke, but the voice that came out was Isaac's. "Daddy, come closer." David froze. "Please, Daddy, I'm scared." It wasn't his son. The voice had that mimicry again, almost right, but not quite, just like that laugh. Then the creature stepped aside. Behind it, crawling on all fours, emaciated, pale and bloodied, was the real Isaac. His eyes were wide with terror, face sunken, lips blue. He had bite marks across his shoulder, like something had been feeding on him slowly, savoring. David bolted forward, but the Wendigo was faster. It lunged. David threw himself over Isaac and tried to fight it off. He grabbed a broken tree branch and stabbed it into the creature's eye. It didn't flinch. It didn't even bleed. It simply grabbed David by the throat and lifted him like a sack of meat. Isaac screamed, but it was no use. With a sickening crunch, the Wendigo threw David into the trunk of a tree. His back snapped like dry twigs. Still alive, barely. David watched helplessly as the Wendigo crouched next to Isaac. It didn't kill him. It whispered something into his ear, and then walked away into the woods. 3 days later, search and rescue found David barely clinging to life, spinal injuries so severe he would never walk again. He'd crawled a mile on his belly, dragging himself with shattered hands and bleeding elbows. He was hospitalized, sedated, questioned. But Isaac was never found. The ranger station had blood on the floors, a child's sweater near the back wall, and strange marks carved into the trees. Symbols that didn't match any known language, and no sign of animal tracks, nothing human either. They said David was suffering from psychosis. That grief had made him hallucinate. But David knew better. He'd seen what was inside the Wendigo's eyes, and every night since, in the psychiatric facility where he now lived, he heard it outside his window, scratching and laughing. Evening turned to night. The wind roared louder than ever, and the snow now came down in hard diagonal sheets. The lantern inside the cabin flickered and hissed against the cold. Jacob sat on the floor, his back to the wall, holding Nathan's hunting rifle across his lap. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours. His eyes were swollen, ring-dark with fear and exhaustion. The sound of branches cracking outside hadn't stopped in hours. Something was circling the cabin, not pacing, circling. For the past hour, it had scratched once, just once, on each wall of the cabin. Then silence. Then a sound on the roof, then more silence. It was intelligent, patient, toying with them. Nathan sat near the small stove, bundled in every blanket they had left. His breath came in trembling waves, and his face was sickly pale. He had barely spoken since they found Arlo's mangled remains. It was more than just shock. It was terror with no bottom. "I think it's still out there," Jacob whispered. Nathan didn't answer. "I don't think it ever left." They had bolted the doors and reinforced the windows as best they could. But a thin wood cabin in the middle of the wilderness wasn't a fortress. It was a coffin waiting to be filled. Suddenly, the lantern blew out. A suffocating darkness swallowed the room. Jacob cursed and fumbled for his lighter, his fingers numb. But the moment the light returned, he froze. There, just beyond the edge of the window, stood a pair of eyes. Burning, hollow, inhuman. And then came the scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was layered, like 1,000 voices screaming at once, distorted through some unnatural frequency. Jacob dropped the lighter and raised the rifle, aiming blindly toward the window. Nathan screamed and backed away toward the corner. The window shattered inward with a violent crack. A long, emaciated arm, grey, rotted and twisted, reached in through the broken frame. The claws were yellow and curved, like a bird of prey. Jacob fired. The blast lit the room in a split-second flare of orange. The thing pulled back. The woods went deathly quiet. Then footsteps on the roof. And then silence again. Jacob backed toward Nathan, breathing heavily. "I hit it," he said, more to himself than anything. "I swear I hit it." Nathan looked at him with wide, glassy eyes. That's not going to stop it. How do you know? Because it doesn't bleed like we do. Jacob turned slowly toward him. Nathan's nose was bleeding now, and his skin was starting to grey. Something was wrong. Very wrong. What's happening to you? Nathan tried to speak, but only coughed. A deep, dry, guttural hack that sounded less like a human throat and more like something breaking inside. Jacob pulled him closer, unwrapping the blanket. The flesh on Nathan's arms was beginning to peel in places, drying, cracking. His teeth, some of them were no longer flat. They were sharpening, elongating. Jacob backed away in horror. Jesus Christ. Nathan met his gaze with something empty, detached. I'm cold, he whispered. So cold. Outside, something shrieked again. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were two voices, one deep and layered, the other newer, raspier, like something freshly made, like something that had just turned. Jacob realized the truth too late. Whatever was out there wasn't the only Wendigo anymore. Nathan was becoming one. Jacob didn't scream. He couldn't. His mind was too frozen to register anything beyond raw, animal survival. He stared at Nathan. Not the Nathan he knew, but the thing that now looked through Nathan's eyes and felt his chest tighten. I'm sorry, he whispered, lifting the rifle again. Nathan didn't flinch. He just stared at him, blood dripping slowly from his mouth. I didn't ask for this, Nathan said, his voice deeper, hollowed, something ancient curling behind it. But it's inside now. I can hear it. Whispering. Jacob stepped back toward the door. You're not him. Not anymore. Nathan took a single step forward. His feet made no sound on the wooden floor. He moved slowly, like he was trying not to spook a wounded animal. I tried to fight it, he whispered. But the hunger, it's stronger. The lantern flared on by itself. Jacob jolted. The room glowed in sickly orange light for a brief second, and then it sputtered and died again. But in that brief glow, Jacob saw something new. Claw marks on the ceiling beams. Long, fresh, like it had already been inside once, like it was watching the whole time. Nathan dropped to his knees. He clawed at his face, his arms screaming. It's burning. Jacob, it's burning. His body convulsed. Bones cracked and shifted under the skin. His spine arched like something was pushing through it. Teeth snapped loudly in his mouth as he bit down hard on his own tongue. Jacob turned, unbolted the cabin door, and ran into the blizzard. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know where he was going, but anything was better than staying in that cabin. The snow whipped at his face. His boots sunk knee-deep into powder. Branches clawed at his jacket, and the forest howled around him like it was alive. He sprinted blind, crashing through the underbrush, not stopping, never stopping, because he knew it was behind him now. Not one thing, but two. The scream came again, this time from behind him, and much closer. He turned once. In the distance, silhouetted against the white storm, were two figures, tall, thin, loping forward, too fast, too graceful to be human. Their heads tilted at the same angle. Their limbs flailed unnaturally long and jointless. One of them was Nathan, and he was smiling. Jacob tripped, fell into a ditch, rolled. Pain exploded in his shoulder, but he forced himself up and kept running. The cold didn't matter now. The snow didn't matter. Only the sound of his own breath, ragged and short. Then, up ahead, he saw something. A light, flickering. A cabin, number not a cabin. A fire. A tall bonfire burning beneath a dead tree, surrounded by dark shapes in the snow. Human? He couldn't tell. They didn't move. Jacob stumbled closer, calling out, "Help! Please, help!" No one answered. He reached the fire and collapsed beside it, gasping. The figures standing near it weren't people. They were statues, made of sticks, bones, and animal skins. Totems. Wendigo totems. And the fire? It wasn't fire at all. It was cold. Blue. Hissing. Jacob staggered back just as the trees behind him split open with a shriek. The creatures stepped into the light, snarling. He turned to run again, but found himself surrounded. Dozens of them. Not just Nathan, not just the first one. More. The Wendigo curse was spreading, fast. And in that moment, Jacob understood something sickening and ancient. This wasn't just a hunting ground. This entire forest was a breeding ground, a nest. One of the creatures leaned in close to him, its voice low, layered, wet with hunger. "Now you see." Then everything went black. Ethan stumbled through the woods, soaked in blood, not all of it his own. His hands trembled, his breaths came ragged. The image of his father being dragged off into the dark by that thing, the Wendigo, burned into his mind like a brand. The forest was no longer just trees and wind. It breathed. It hungered. The flashlight he carried was nearly dead. Its beam flickered, casting twisted shadows that danced like ghosts along the bark of trees. Every crack of a twig, every flutter of wind through the leaves made him jerk his head in terror. He no longer knew where he was going. His compass had shattered in the scuffle, and the GPS had lost signal hours ago. He had to keep moving. Ethan's feet dragged along the muddy ground as his adrenaline waned. The wound on his shoulder, deep claw marks, throbbed with every heartbeat. Infection already setting in, or maybe something worse. He remembered the stories. Those who are wounded by the Wendigo either die or change. But he couldn't stop now. Suddenly, up ahead, a clearing. He emerged into a patch of moonlight, breath hitching. In the middle stood a decrepit cabin, its wooden frame rotting, moss curling up the sides, windows dark and empty. The place radiated an eerie stillness, as if time itself had died here. But it was shelter. He limped toward it, pushing open the door. It groaned painfully, as though warning him. Inside, dust choked the air. Animal skulls hung from the rafters, wind chimes made from bone clinked faintly, and symbols, native, old, protective, were etched into the wooden walls. Someone had lived here, a hunter perhaps, or a shaman. There was a journal on the table, bound in leather, yellowed with age. He opened it. The first page read, "Those marked by the Wendigo never truly return." He turned another page. "It doesn't kill out of hunger. It kills out of rage. And if it touches you, truly touches you, you carry its shadow, its curse." Ethan's hand shook as he read. His wound began to pulse, burn. He dropped the book and staggered back, falling against the wall. His vision blurred. Sweat poured down his face. Then came the sound, not from outside, from within. A low growl, gurgling, like something ancient choking on its own breath, echoed through the cabin. He whipped around. The shadows shifted unnaturally. A coldness enveloped the room. The symbols on the walls began to bleed. Real blood. No, it can't be here, he muttered, backing away. But it was. Out from the darkest corner, the Wendigo emerged, towering, bones cracking as it moved. Its skin hung like rotting parchment over spindly limbs, and its face, oh God, that face, was a skull stretched with gristle, antlers jagged as knives, eyes glowing like hellfire. But worse was the voice. It didn't speak with words. It entered Ethan's head, clawing at his sanity. "You are mine," Ethan screamed, backing into the door, trying to escape. but it slammed shut by itself. The windows went black. He turned, ran toward the bedroom, slammed the door behind him. Nothing could stop it, but he needed time. Time to think, to plan. His breathing ragged, Ethan looked in the mirror and froze. His eyes were no longer his. They glowed faintly yellow. His veins were blackening beneath the skin. The claw mark on his shoulder pulsed like a heartbeat, oozing something dark, foul. He was turning. He was becoming it. Hours earlier, we go back to where it all began, before the curse truly took hold. When Ethan had sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows with his father, David. A simple trip, a bonding weekend, a getaway from the chaos of city life. Neither had any clue what they were stepping into. David had chosen this forest because it was off the grid, secluded, peaceful. But he didn't know its real name. Witiko Sakahikan. Wendigo Lake. The indigenous locals never came here. The land had been cursed centuries ago, when starvation led desperate tribes to cannibalism, birthing a demon of insatiable hunger, the Wendigo. It was said to stalk those who entered its domain, especially when they were vulnerable, grieving, angry, broken. David was all three. His wife had died just 6 months earlier, Ethan's mother. Since then, David had become withdrawn, emotionally numb. This trip was supposed to bring them closer again, heal the rift. Instead, it destroyed them. That night, Ethan remembered, the howls had started. Not wolves, not coyotes, something else, something that mimicked human voices. Ethan had gone to investigate after David fell asleep. He never made it back. Now, present again. Ethan stood in the cabin's bathroom, staring at his reflection. His skin was growing grey, his teeth lengthening. Every heartbeat was pain. Every breath felt like fire. He wanted to scream, but what if the scream wasn't his anymore? He picked up a knife from the floor. If I do this now, maybe I can stop it. He raised it to his throat, but the reflection in the mirror grinned at him. Before he did, it wasn't a reflection anymore. It was the Wendigo inside him. His body moved on its own. He dropped the knife. His mouth opened, but it wasn't him speaking. It was hunger. It was rage. It was death. And somewhere, deep in the woods, something howled in response. A call. A welcome. Epilogue. 2 hikers found the cabin weeks later, torn apart, symbols smeared with blood. No sign of Ethan, no sign of David. But in the trees surrounding the cabin, claw marks stretched high, far too high for any man. And in the journal that Ethan had dropped, a final entry had appeared. One that hadn't been there before. Scrawled in jagged handwriting, "I'm still hungry. Thank you for staying with us through tonight's chilling tale. If you're still listening, it means the shadows didn't scare you away. But remember, what we share here isn't just fiction for some. Sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones rooted in truth. The ones whispered in late-night conversations. The ones no one dares to say out loud. Here on our channel, we bring you terrifying atmospheric horror stories every single night. Whether it's haunted encounters, cursed rituals, creatures of the dark, or true unexplained mysteries, you'll find it all here, told with care, crafted to unsettle. So if you enjoy horror that lingers even after the story ends, consider subscribing and turning on the bell icon, not just to support the channel, but to never miss the next nightmare. And if tonight's story left you with chills, let us know in the comments. Your feedback helps us keep digging deeper into the darkness. This is your nightly dose of horror, and we'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same fear. Until then, sleep well. if you can.